It starts subtly, a flicker, hesitation in the hum of modern life, then silence. No electricity, no signal, no systems quietly working behind the scenes to keep your world intact. Within minutes, the routines you trust begin to collapse. Refrigerators warm, water stops flowing, elevators freeze mid-journey. And for the first time in your life, you're not inconvenienced, you're exposed. Here's the part most people never consider. This isn't some distant apocalypse scenario, simply life without the grid. And for most of human history, that wasn't a crisis. It was Tuesday. The people we casually label as medieval didn't survive because they were tougher in some abstract sense. They survived because their entire world was built around resilience instead of convenience. They didn't rely on systems they couldn't repair, didn't outsource survival to invisible infrastructure. Everything they needed was either understood, built, or maintained by their own hands. What you're about to see isn't nostalgia, it's a recalibration. These are not relics of a primitive past. They are solutions forged under pressure, tested across centuries, and quietly abandoned in favor of comfort. But when comfort fails, these are the systems that still stand. And once you understand them, you start to see modern life differently. During the coldest centuries of Europe, when winters stretched long and unforgiving, heat was not about comfort, it was about endurance. Yet instead of relying on constant fuel consumption, like modern heating systems, medieval households used something far more efficient. The masonry heater functioned as a thermal reservoir. Built from stone or brick, it absorbed intense heat from a short, controlled fire. But instead of letting that heat escape immediately, it was stored within the mass of the structure itself. Over the next day, sometimes longer, that stored energy radiated steadily into the living space. This wasn't just effective, it was remarkably efficient. Modern testing of similar designs shows heat retention and distribution far exceeding typical fireplaces or metal stoves. The key was not burning more fuel, but extracting every possible unit of energy from what was burned. In a real-world scenario, this changes everything. Instead of constantly feeding a fire, you conserve fuel, reduce exposure, and maintain a stable indoor climate. In a prolonged outage, that difference becomes the line between sustainability and depletion. When famine and cold struck Europe in the early 14th century, survival didn't favor the strongest or the wealthiest. It favored those who understood their environment. The semi-subterranean dwellings, often referred to as Grubenhauser, weren't accidents of poverty. They were deliberate adaptations. By sinking part of the structure into the ground, inhabitants tapped into one of the most stable thermal zones available on Earth. Below the surface, temperatures remain relatively constant year-round. This meant that even during extreme cold, these homes started from a baseline far warmer than the outside air. Heating such a space required significantly less energy. In practical terms, this is still one of the most effective passive survival strategies available. Whether through earth-sheltered construction or improvised insulation using soil and natural materials, reducing exposure to temperature extremes dramatically lowers your resource demands. This is not about comfort. It's about reducing the fight you have to win. Modern insulation relies on manufactured materials, chemical treatments, and precise installation. Medieval builders achieved comparable results using plant matter and technique. A properly constructed thatch roof was thick, layered, and tightly packed. Each stalk created tiny pockets of trapped air, forming an insulating barrier that kept heat in during winter and out during summer. But its real advantage was breathability. Moisture could escape without compromising warmth. That meant interiors stayed dry, reducing mold, rot, and the slow degradation that destroys both structures and health. In storm conditions, that flexibility became an asset. Instead of resisting wind with rigidity, thatch absorbed and distributed force. Many such roofs survived storms that destroyed more rigid modern alternatives. For survival, this teaches a critical lesson. Materials don't need to be complex to be effective. What matters is how they interact with the environment. Medieval survival wasn't limited to warmth and food. It extended into how people structured space itself. Spiral staircases in castles weren't aesthetic choices. Their clockwise design created a mechanical disadvantage for anyone ascending with a weapon in their right hand, which historically was the majority. Defenders moving downward had freedom of motion. Attackers were constrained, forced into awkward angles. Add uneven steps into the mix, and unfamiliar invaders would stumble at the worst possible moment. This is environmental strategy in its purest form. You don't wait for danger, you shape the conditions so that danger is already at a disadvantage. Applied today, it's not about building castles, it's about thinking ahead. Entry points, visibility, movement paths, these are all variables you can control long before a threat appears. One of the simplest, yet most misunderstood survival insights lies in something as ordinary as an egg. Freshly laid eggs are coated in a microscopic protective layer known as the cuticle. This natural barrier seals the shell, preventing bacteria from entering while retaining internal moisture. Medieval households stored eggs without refrigeration because they didn't interfere with this layer. As a result, eggs remained viable far longer than most people today would expect. Modern processing often removes this coating for appearance and sanitation standards, creating dependency on refrigeration. But the underlying principle remains valuable. Understanding how natural preservation works allows you to extend food viability without energy. In a grid-down scenario, that knowledge becomes immediate leverage. Clean water has always been a decisive factor in survival. Medieval communities addressed this challenge using systems that combine biology and basic chemistry. Reed beds acted as natural filtration zones. Their root systems hosted microorganisms that broke down contaminants while physically trapping debris. When combined with layers of sand and charcoal, the result was a multi-stage purification system capable of significantly improving water quality. Charcoal, in particular, functions through adsorption, binding toxins and impurities within its porous structure. This is not theory, it is still the foundation of many modern filtration technologies. And importantly, it requires no electricity. In real-world survival, access to water is non-negotiable. Systems like this can be built, maintained, and adapted using locally available materials. Fire is not just heat, it's continuity. Losing it in a survival situation can cost time, energy, and safety. Char cloth provided a solution. By heating natural fabric in a low-oxygen environment, medieval people created a material that could catch even the smallest spark. That spark didn't need to become flame immediately. It only needed to become an ember. From there, fire could be built reliably. Unlike modern lighters, which depend on fuel and mechanical integrity, char cloth is renewable and repairable. As long as you have fabric and a container, you can produce more. This is resilience at the material level. Tools that don't fail permanently, only temporarily. Clothing in the medieval world was not disposable. It was engineered. Through a process known as fulling, wool fibers were compressed and interlocked, creating a dense, durable fabric. Combined with the natural oils present in wool, the result was material that resisted wind and moisture while retaining heat. These garments were not replaced seasonally. They were maintained, repaired, and relied upon for decades. For survival, durability matters more than comfort trends. A single reliable layer can outperform multiple fragile ones. Without refrigeration, preserving meat required an understanding of what causes spoilage. Wood ash, highly alkaline, creates an environment hostile to bacteria. By packing meat in ash, medieval households slowed decomposition significantly. This wasn't guesswork. It was applied observation of how environments affect decay. While not a universal solution, it highlights a broader principle. Preservation is not always about cold, it's about controlling conditions. Perhaps one of the most overlooked survival systems is fermentation. What appears to be decay is often controlled transformation. Fermented foods provided not only extended shelf life, but also enhanced nutrition and digestibility. In a world without supplements or modern medicine, this mattered. The process relies on managing microbial activity rather than eliminating it entirely. Understanding that balance allows you to turn limited resources into sustainable nutrition. By now, the pattern is clear. Medieval survival was not built on abundance, it was built on understanding. They worked with natural systems instead of overriding them. They prioritized durability over convenience. They designed environments, tools, and routines that could function without constant external support. Modern life, for all its advantages, has moved in the opposite direction. Efficiency has been replaced by dependency. Redundancy has been replaced by speed. So the real question isn't whether you could replicate every one of these methods. It's whether you recognize the mindset behind them. Because when systems fail, and eventually some will, it's not the person with the most tools who thrives. It's the one who understands how to use what's already there. If this kind of knowledge matters to you, if you want more insights that go beyond surface-level history and into real-world application, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who needs to see it, because the lights can go out at any time. But knowledge, if you hold on to it, doesn't disappear.